Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. Welcome to the end of the week. I hope you have a lovely, relaxing weekend planned ahead. First up, our ongoing coverage of China's opening up. Let's just touch on a few important developments for today's episode, and we'll have more to discuss on this front tomorrow. In its strongest criticism yet of China's handling of the pandemic, the World Health Organization this week accused Beijing of underrepresenting the severity of its Omicron outbreak. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, one top official with the international body expressed, quote, "We believe the current numbers being published from China underrepresent the true impact of the disease in terms of hospital admissions, in terms of ICU, intensive care unit admissions, particularly in terms of deaths." End quote. Unsurprisingly, Beijing hit back against the comments, claiming that it has always been fully transparent and that everything is fine. Quote, "Since COVID began, China has shared information and data with the international community in an open and transparent manner. At the moment, China's COVID situation is under control. It is hoped that the WHO Secretariat will take a science-based, objective and just position and play a positive role in addressing the pandemic globally." End quote. State media, again, unsurprisingly, is telling its domestic population that the reason for this increased international concern is simply Western media bias. Quote, "Such a biased tone is rampant in certain Western media coverage that exaggerated the epidemic crisis in China through exaggerating sensationalist stories, extreme tragic cases in hospitals, and horrific images at crematoria across the country." End quote. Meanwhile, yesterday, Hong Kong's chief executive, John Lee, announced that after 3 years, the special administrative region and the mainland of the country have confirmed plans to reopen their shared border from this coming Sunday. A win for cross-border business and tourism. However, crossings to and from the mainland will be tightly limited to an estimated 50,000 a day each way. Lee expressed, quote, "Our path returning to normalcy is now nearly 100% complete." End quote. The easing of cross-border restrictions was timed to coincide with Beijing's own dropping of entry requirements for overseas travellers, including scrapping PCR tests on arrival, which of course was announced last month. The opening could not come sooner for the financial hub. The city's GDP is expected to contract 3.2% in 2022. We recently learned too that last year, retail sales in Hong Kong also declined nearly 20% versus 2019. Many businesses will be eagerly awaiting the slow return of mainland tourists. But now let's move to the Chinese economy generally and look at the other special administrative region, which has had an even worse 2022. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to hit that like button. If you have not subscribed and you like this sort of information, you'd like to be on top of the most up-to-date analysis on China, maybe consider subscribing. And as always, anyone who can go that extra mile, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Okay, now let's move through several important economic developments. I am sorry, as we are getting more data from the month of December and from 2022 as a whole, most of this is very bad news. Indeed, the damage last month appears to be worse than expected. But we do need to cover it. And let's start with China's Las Vegas. Japanese financial media outlet Nikkei Asia reports today that casino revenue in Macau fell 51% to an 18-year low in 2022, quote, as Beijing zero COVID restrictions kept away tourists from the Chinese mainland. End quote. The $5.23 billion in revenue represented just 14% of pre-pandemic levels seen in 2019, a devastating collapse in income. Around 4.8 million mainland tourists visited Macau in the January through November period, down 24% year-on-year, and well under the 27 million mainland tourists which visited the SAR in all of 2019. We have been following Macau's weathering of the storm periodically these last 3 years. Last year, the local government, which relies heavily on gaming revenues as a source of fiscal income, warned that the economic downturn in the city was so acute that there are real risks of social unrest. With opening up, a battered Macau, like Hong Kong, will be hoping for a large return of tourists in 2023. Next up, logistics. New data, as expected, shows that China's logistics businesses shrank for the third consecutive month in December, as first zero COVID and then the sudden opening up smashed the industry. This week, the China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing published their Prosperity Index for the logistics industry for the month of December. The index hit 46% last month, a 6% decrease year-on-year, and falling from 46.4% in November and 48.8% in October. We remember that a number below 50 represents a contraction. The worker sub-index saw the largest month-on-month drop in December since the Shanghai lockdown, with deliveries of orders from e-commerce platforms seeing the worst hits from labor shortages. According to the China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing, the number of delivery staff at e-commerce companies coming to work fell to 70% at one point in December nationally, with some cities seeing this figure drop to around 40%. The report admits that the last few months have been very painful and disruptive for the industry, but after the first few COVID waves, it anticipates that the logistics industry will bounce back in Q2 of this year. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai writes today that we are already seeing some bounce back in some regions in areas of logistics. China's road freight volume, for example, rose week on week in the week through January 1st, narrowing the year-on-year decline from 35.2% to 27.1%. So we are seeing some relative activity return, but year-on-year the activity is still way down. Next up, according to a statement yesterday by China State Railway Group, Beijing's investment in its state railway operations dropped 5.1% in 2022, the third consecutive year of decline. The fixed asset investment in 2022 dropped to 710 billion yuan, $103 billion, a decline versus 2021 and about 12% down from 2019. Zero COVID disruptions are part of the reason for the decline. However, another more primary reason is that about 70% of the planned 16 major high-speed lines across the country for the current 5-year plan through 2025 have been completed, with much of the remainder to be completed this year. In 2023, the company plans to fund the construction of 3,000 kilometers of new railway lines, a 26.8% decline versus 2022. China, of course, is famous for its extensive high-speed rail network, which has springed up over the past decade and a half, and while more is planned, no low-hanging fruit in terms of obvious new routes remain. Indeed, planned routes have been criticized as being too expensive, for example, the new Shanghai to Chongqing line, or politically rather than economically justified, for example, the Sichuan to Tibet line. China State Railway Group also recorded a 94.7 billion yuan net loss in the first 9 months of last year, a painful and widening 36% loss year-on-year. Of course, as a state-owned enterprise, the taxpayers will fill this hole. Next up, we already knew that services activity was smashed in December based on official numbers that were published last week. The release of the more independent Caixin China General Services Business Activity Index yesterday reinforces this conclusion. The index rose to 48 in December from 46.7 the previous month, the fourth straight month of contraction. And just like the above logistics index, a number below 50 represents a contraction. The Caixin China General Composite PMI, which covers both the manufacturing and services sectors, stood at 48.3 for December, also the fourth consecutive month below 50. And of course, we all know why. Quote, both supply and demand shrank in the sector due to COVID outbreaks. The pandemic also took a toll on overseas demand as the reading for new export orders slid back into contraction. End quote. Okay, one more economic update to cover before we end today's episode, and I let you guys enjoy your Friday and your weekend. Yesterday evening, the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, and China's top banking regulatory agency announced in a joint statement that Beijing will allow eligible cities to further relax mortgage rates for first-home buyers, extending a measure introduced in September to prop up the market on the demand side. According to the statement, the minimum interest rates on loans for first home purchases can be lowered or removed in cities recording month-on-month and year-on-year housing price drops for 3 consecutive months. We remember that by Q4, some cities had already reduced their minimum mortgage rates to 3.8%, lower than the national floor of 4.1%. Analysts with the brokerage Huatai Securities told clients that this move, quote, signals that the mechanism linking mortgage rates with local housing prices will be normalized. End quote. Many cities will be eligible too. Once again, according to Huatai Securities, 38 of China's 70 major cities experienced a protracted slump in prices and sales during the 3 months through November, up from 23 in the previous 3 months. As we explored in yesterday's video, however, it will take much more than this to revive the demand side of the housing market this year. Expect more measures to come. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful Friday and a good weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow.